Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenric Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. And today's going to be a little bit of a different one. So we have had a series of episodes that have been released here in this season 3 about inquiry. We started off with inquiry in science with a conversation with Dr. Nodurft. We moved to inquiry in social studies with a conversation with Dr. Wiseman. And then we moved into inquiry in the math classroom with Dr. Austin and finished up with inquiry in the English classroom with Dr. DeCalio. And this episode is going to be kind of a bonus one. And I thought it would be interesting for me to sit down in the studio and sort of offer my reflections over the 4 episodes in the series and, putting myself in here a little bit with my own experiences in teaching through inquiry. When I was starting to envision this series, the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast is really about supporting all teachers. And so I was worried a little bit that I was going to only be focused at a particular part of our audience in each one of these episodes. But I'm beginning to realize that no matter what you end up teaching, whether that is science or math or social studies or English, that inquiry really looks very similar across all of the content areas. And so no matter what you ended up bringing to the table, I'm hoping that you gave each one of those episodes a chance and that you listened to it, even if it didn't necessarily directly tie into your content area. And I thought I would spend this episode sort of reflecting on what I heard from each one of our guest speakers and the overarching ties that really kind of bind teaching through inquiry together. So I kind of want to start with what inquiry starts with, and that is asking a great question. And what does that mean across the content areas, right? If we're talking about a question in science, it's usually about trying to figure something out, right? What is the question that we're trying to answer? What is the relationship between this variable and this variable? Or it could be as simple as, how does this work, right? I mean, Dr. Nodurft's ideas around wanting to figure out how a lightsaber works, right? It's the engagement of trying to figure something out or wonder if I can understand this or if I can make it better. Right? It's the why questions. It's the how questions. It's not the trivia. It's not the, what is the acceleration due to gravity? Oh, I know that's 9.8 meters per second, right? That's not a good question. In social studies, that good question is about relevancy, right? Why is what I'm learning right now relevant to my life, right? Why is this historical concept that happened maybe 100 years ago or 50 years ago, why is that relevant to what's happening today? So we still have the why questions, right? Why does it work the way it's working? Why is our current social structure the way it is, right? And understanding the history behind it. Dr. Austin came in with talking about how math is about solving puzzles, right? It's about solving problems, very similar to what science is, but really a lot of similarities with what social studies is too, right? We're talking about how we're understanding the concepts before us, the why something is working the way it is, the how I get from point A to point B. And through math, a lot of times we look at it as a puzzle. And I remember thinking about this even as a science teacher, right? I loved a certain type of problem. For me, it was electric circuits because I thought of it like a big puzzle. Why is it that when I change something over here, it affects something down here? And if you think about that broadly, right, that is a social studies concept too. If I change something here, how is it going to have a ripple effect as it goes all the way through time, as it goes all the way through the community, as it goes all the way through the country? English oftentimes is sort of an outlier in terms of how we think about the classroom. Science and math and social studies is a lot of facts and figures and processes. and understanding how things change over time. And to some extent, Dr. DiCalio talked about that in our inquiry discussion on English. But more often than not, inquiry in English isn't about outward facing questions, but inward facing revelations. It's wanting to know, what am I going to learn about myself when I'm looking at this piece of literary analysis or this book or this poem? What am I bringing to the table, and how is it going to change me as I go through this? But you know what? Really, all of the inquiries, all of the disciplines, to some extent, all of the disciplines, when going through an inquiry process, you are different at the end than what you were at the beginning. You know more. And it's not necessarily you know more physics or you know more social studies, history, whatever, government. It's that you know more about how the world works, and you know more about yourself and how that lives in the world, how you live in the world. So, inquiry, what I remember from discussing with all of our guest speakers, inquiry is less about the specific content that a teacher is teaching and more about the process of learning, the process of asking great questions, of finding information, of internalizing and reflecting on what it is that you're learning and why it's important. And that honestly is a process that we would love all of our students to walk away with at the end of the day. It's not necessarily did they learn X or can they do Y, but it's about creating an individual that is ready to go out into the world and be a functioning member of society. Someone who can take in information, reflect on that information, and act on that information in the way that's going to serve themselves, in the way it's going to serve their community, and it's going to way to serve the people around them. Now, we can't go on in this conversation without really reflecting on what the teacher brings to the table, right? And really, what maybe didn't necessarily come out of these episodes was, what are the hurdles that the teacher has to overcome in order to teach this way? I remember talking to each one of these guest speakers and thinking, man, they are so engrossed in the passion of their content, right? Dr. Nodurft really loves physics and being able to convey that physics. Dr. Austin really had a background in mathematics and wants others to love math. But from a teacher standpoint, what we have to do is we have to step back. When we are trying to do something inquiry in the classroom, the whole point of it is for the students to take the lead and answer the question, find the information, do the reflecting, coalesce their ideas into a solution or an idea that solves the problem. And that's hard for a passionate teacher, right? For a passionate teacher to get up in front of their classroom and say, oh, I really love this topic. I hope you're going to love it too, but I need you to find that out on your own, is tough. I remember in my first few years of teaching, I wanted to give all of the information, right? I wanted to tell the students exactly why something was so cool. Oh, you want to know why the sky is blue? Oh man, let me tell you, and it's this process and this interaction between light and matter, and it's just really, really cool. But for a student to discover why the sky is blue or why this is happening in our political society now and how that related to something back, 100 years ago, that is going to be where a student finds their passion, right? They are going to understand that, oh man, this is really cool content because they discovered it on their own and they realized that they could understand it. So what we have to do is to build the identity within the students that they can do this, right? That school is not about them sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day and receiving knowledge, right? School should be a place where they go and discuss ideas and research and learn on their own and find the information that they are going to eventually be passionate about, right? I was never under any illusions that my students were all going to become physicists, right? That was not going to be the thing, right? I was a physics teacher, I was an astronomy teacher, and did I have a handful that ended up pursuing physics after they went through my class? I did, but by and large, 95% of them, 99% of them didn't go into doing physics. And that is fine, as long as what I hoped to instill in them was that they learned about the world around them. They learned how to take in information and analyze it in a way that was like a scientist and make decisions based off of that. Another hurdle that teachers have are resources, right? I mean, if we're talking about doing something like inquiry in the classroom, one, that takes a lot of time, right? It's such an amazing way to teach students and it's such an amazing way for students to learn, but it does take time. And so a teacher has to be willing to devote that time. So step back and let the students wrestle with the concept for longer than what you would probably normally think in the classroom, right? Providing little nudges here and there, getting them back onto the track that you want them to go, but you have to let them discover the answers themselves, discover the information themselves, take that information in a wide variety of ways that are a lot of times going to be going in the wrong direction. But then they figure that out on their own and they turn around. When they discover that they've made a mistake on their own and can self-correct, then that is a success in inquiry. And yeah, we definitely don't need them to eventually learn the content, right? They're going to have to do a test. They're going to have to do an assessment. They're going to have to do something, right? A big project. They have to eventually learn. And so it's our job as teachers to offer guide rails, right? They are on the highway. They're on the bridge, whatever metaphor you want to say. And they have to get from one end to the other. But we don't want them falling overboard. We don't want them getting off of the road. We don't want them going down a path that's going to lead them nowhere. So us as teachers have to be the one that can advise the students to keep them moving in generally the right direction. Another hurdle that is going to be in front of a teacher in trying to do something that is inquiry in the classroom is going to be that this process is going to be very different from what they probably experienced in their own school and career. I know that whenever I went through school, right, when I'm talking elementary school, I'm talking middle school, I'm talking high school, by and large, what we did was we sat in our desks and we took notes and we answered questions, and there was a project thrown in here or there. In science classes, there was a lab thrown in here or there. But even in my physics class, whenever I was in high school, we did very few labs. Okay, it wasn't even once a week. It was, maybe once every few weeks that we did a lab experience. And even whenever I became a teacher, I knew that I didn't want that, right? Because we knew that hands-on learning was going to be best, and so I wanted to throw in as many labs as possible. But taking that a step up and say, okay, I want to do something inquiry where the students are the ones that are discovering the answers, that was way outside of my wheelhouse. That was something that I had never experienced before. And did I learn about it through my teacher preparation? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But I went through some professional developments involving authentic learning. I went through professional developments involving project-based learning. And I thought, well, maybe I can do this. And so I tried. And probably one of my first forays into inquiry was in an AP Physics class. It was AP Physics 2. I was teaching in Sherman. And it was sort of an open inquiry where my students were looking at heat cycles, okay, through like an engine. It was part of thermodynamics. And I had this bright idea that we were going to take apart some motors, some like lawnmower motors, some weed whacker motors. I had some things that were donated to the classroom. And so we spent a couple of weeks just literally trying to take apart these things and understand what we saw. Did that do exactly what I wanted? Absolutely not. I don't think it did. I mean, I think the students got a better understanding of how a motor works. Did I do an especially great job with bringing it back towards the cycles of thermodynamics? Maybe not great, but I certainly tried. But my students were able to explore something on their own with a little bit of information that I would give them here and there. I think one of the missions that they had was to find the carburetor on these motors and try to figure out how it worked. And this was sort of in line with what we were learning about in thermodynamics and engine cycles. One really cool implication of this particular project was that when we eventually moved over to electric circuits and we talked about an electric motor and an electric generator, we were able to really compare to what we did with the gasoline motors, the heat engines, and we're able to kind of compare and contrast and take apart some electric motors and see how they worked as well. So that inquiry, even though I didn't necessarily think about the second part of it whenever I was first starting, had some pretty far-reaching effects, and I was able to tie it in even further on into the year. So I guess the lesson here is really just to get started, right? I mean, if you have an idea of how to engage your students in something that is part of their lives, right? I'm talking motors, right? Car engines. Obviously, I couldn't bring a car engine in the classroom, but I brought something smaller, right? Something that was very relevant to their daily life. And I brought that in and I just let them explore. And in that exploration, we learned the content that we were supposed to learn. Could I have structured it better? Sure. And I got better as we went through this. That's all we can ask for as a teacher, right? The experience is going to teach us how to do things better. So in reflecting on these 4 episodes, what I realized was that inquiry was about giving the students an opportunity to explore and expand, to go the way that they wanted to go in the content that excited them most. They got to answer their own questions. And in answering their questions, they were able to answer my questions, right, as the teacher, right? They were able to learn the content that I actually needed them to learn. But if they're experiencing inquiry in math and they're experiencing inquiry in science, and they see the same sort of things in social studies and in English, then what they're picking up on is that really learning is just exploration, right? And that is how we end up creating these lifelong learners that we talk about. We want our students to go out into the world and continue the process of learning, whether that's formal or informal, continue the process of learning, taking in information, and then doing something with that information, making decisions. To kind of round out this episode, I'm hoping that you enjoyed the series on inquiry from all of our different guest speakers across the content areas. I'm hoping that if you listen to this one and realize you missed one or two, maybe because you thought that they weren't necessarily a part of your content areas, like if you're a science person and you listen to math and science, go back and take a look at the English and social studies one and vice versa. You might end up learning something about how you can do something better in the classroom based off of how a different content area looks at the same sort of technique, inquiry in the classroom. And that is all the time that we have for this bonus episode of the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast. Remember that the Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.